Good morning. My name is Rachel Binnington, and I'm the project coordinator for the AIM25 Yerusha Mapping Jewish London project. And I'm here this morning with Geoff Browell, the head of archives and research collections at King's College London, and historian Leonie James. And we're going to be talking about the methodology and the findings and the history of this exciting data aggregation project that we've done. So Geoff, you are the chairperson for AIM25. Would you be able to tell us a bit about AIM25 and why the Yerusha bid had held specific appeal as what I believe was your first formal bid to do a project like this?
Well, AIM25 was set up in 1999 and it went live in 2000. So we're actually celebrating our 21st anniversary this year. And we started as a consortium of a number of universities and learned societies in the London area for their archives. The idea is that we'd aggregate the catalogue descriptions and that would help researchers in their task of finding useful archives. And then we've grown from there on. About 6 years ago, we changed our constitution to become a charity, and I became the chair of it. And we now have about 150 members. So when AIM25 was in its previous incarnation, we received several rounds of funding from different bodies. This is the first time we've received a large sum of money for a project in our own right as a charity.
And what was it about the call that captured your attention?
It was an interesting subject. We and my colleagues, the other trustees, felt that study of Jewish archives in London merited closer examination, and we were interested in taking part in a project that was pan-European.
What have been the most significant discoveries you feel that we've come across during this process?
What I found absolutely fascinating is the breadth of material that there is in many of the repositories in this sort of London area. And I learned an awful lot about Jewish people, their contribution to all kinds of areas, politics, communities, local government, academia, research, medicine, science, and I'm talking about men and women as well.
I would say it's some of the institutions. The Bernuri Gallery is a highlight. I didn't know very much about it before the project began. And so as far as my own learning was concerned, it's been really useful getting up to speed with, in that case, emigre artists. But there are many other collections that are hidden out there, and really our project has only scratched the surface.
What struck me from doing the surveys of archives that I did is the range of material, not only in terms of the different areas of Jewish contribution, but also the different types of material that there are. There are your classic manuscript collections, objects of Jewish significance, audio, video, paintings, art. You've got absolutely everything there. So I think that was the other thing that struck me, how rich in terms of variety of type of material the stuff that we found really is.
So one of the phrases that comes up in the conversations that we've had over the last year is enhancing the descriptions. Mm-hmm. I know that you went back into a few repositories' descriptions and have increased and opened up the access points. Was there a point while you're doing this process of adding the Jewish element into the description where you thought, why isn't the element here already?
In some places, material was described very directly as Jewish. So it would not have needed any kind of enhancing. We just needed to grab it and put it into our sort of collection of data. In other places, it was implied that somebody or a collection was Jewish. So that took a little bit more digging around. And in other places, it wasn't mentioned at all. But sort of being a researcher and also having got a bit of a nose for it in the process of doing the first few months of Yerusha, you start to get a feel for what might be a Jewish collection from a description, whether it's a biographical description that describes someone and you know that they are Jewish from something that's in that biography, but it's not overt, or whether it's a connection with another Jewish organization. So you start to kind of get a feel for it.
tell me 3 of the things that you uncovered or collections that you encountered that really surprised you.
Some of the material from the kind of scientific contributions of Jewish immigrants, if you like, in the 17th, 18th centuries. Emmanuel Mendes da Costa, for example, has some lovely notebooks and things in the Royal Society. Now, again, whether or not because he was Jewish, that means it's a Jewish collection is another biggest question that we had to ask in the process of the project itself. But in terms of people, you know, he's one that sticks in my mind. There are some lovely papers of Jewish women in a number of different collections. The Freud Museum, for example, obviously has some really interesting collections there. Papers of female MPs, Millie Miller, there are tons. And I think the really interesting thing for me, again, coming at it from a slightly different angle, was finding out about the people, you know, people whose collections they were. So the biographical side of the collection for me was really interesting. And I felt a real kind of pull towards finding out more about some of these people. And, you know, there just simply wasn't the time. But, you know, not just the early collections that I'm naturally interested in, but some of the 1930s, you know, people who fled persecution in mainland Europe. Some, you know, there are some really interesting personal stories as well.
How do you feel that AIM25 can handle and help the archives that are in its membership be more culturally sensitive and aware of the material that they're handling?
There are 2 ways in which we're doing that. We have done it and we will continue to do it. And one of those ways is in which AIM25 acts as a consortium for professional development of archivists. So as well as a research portal that we maintain, we also have a training program with several meetings annually at which archivists can receive lectures and advice and guidance from experts. So in one of our partner meetings only the other day, we heard from a colleague at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine who'd been running a project on just this cultural sensitivity question. So that's one immediate way in which we can learn from one another. The other way is in access points. So AIM25 manages the UK Archival Thesaurus, UCAT, and it's a diverse subject thesaurus that's used to describe and summarize collections. And we can make it more diverse by introducing terms that are current, translations of older terms that are no longer used or inappropriate, and translations that can help the researcher and the general public navigate through our collections and find what they need and what they want.
So now that we're handing over our findings to the main Yerusha project, what is the plan for the work that's been done thus far with regards to AIM25?
We're planning to relaunch AIM25 on its 21st birthday later in the year with a new website, a new database, and new functionality. And that will mean that the collections that have been pulled to the forefront as part of the Yerusha project can find their proper place in this new brand spanking new catalogue. So that's one really important way in which we're going to bring them to the forefront, really. We can highlight them, and it gives us a space to highlight the stories as well. So it will come with blogging functionality, another functionality that enables us to tell stories about those people and organizations. That's really what's important. And as I've always said throughout my career, archives are about people, not paper.
Absolutely. So with that people component in mind and looking at this increased functionality, do you think that the work that's been done thus far on mapping Jewish London could be adapted for the other local ethnic community groups in London as a microcosm to really enhance and bring out what hasn't been seen before? And do you have any long-term plans as AIM25 to help do that through your professional development and community engagement stuff?
We have had plans for many years to do this, and we have tried in the past, and we will try again.
What do you need from the archives community and from the academic community and from general public engagement to make that possible?
Support for fundraising applications. So intellectual support for applications, and really support within organisations to back us up, within universities, museums, local authorities, to say, this is worthwhile work, we want to be part of it, please support it. And join up with communities above all else. So we wanted to do more of that with this current Yerusha project for AIM25, but the virus and lack of time intervened.
Is there room for AIM25 to collaborate with other organizations within these communities, for instance, like the Board of Deputies for British Jews? I know early on in pre-COVID, like literally, I think a week and a half before the world very dramatically shifted, we were in conversations with Don Waterman, who runs the Heritage for the Board of Deputies. What kind of engagement and support would you need from external organizations?
One of the most important things to come out of this project has been the cooperation between conventional archives and museums and other heritage organizations who often don't work very closely together. But we would like local community groups to get involved with the actual work of identifying collections, preserving collections, especially contemporary ones and older ones that may be in storage or hidden, and teasing out those stories. So we could think about oral histories, we could think about identification and rescuing of collections, and also using the stories that are brought to the forefront and the work that people do together as a form of community building.
So how do we do that then?
What happened in the early stages of AIM25 is we piloted a program of the use of peripatetic archivists. And we were one of the first projects to do that. So this is sending field archivists out to search out for collections and to work with hard-pressed local archivists who may only work part-time or who are swamped with work, to assist them in their tasks so that they no longer felt isolated. And that model works really, really well, we've discovered, and we're always told. So big organizations can look after themselves, but the long tail of smaller archives can't and have a lot of problems, difficulties in managing their collections day to day. The sort of project that we've been running here and future projects and the AIM25 community as a community of professionals can help support the discovery of wonderful new collections. And it's through that means, peripatetic archivists, that we can work more closely with communities as well.
Is that program still running, or is it something that you're hoping to reactivate in
It's something that we're hoping to reactivate, yeah. Obviously, employing archivists costs money, takes time, and we've been rather distracted of late.
That's perfectly valid, but we are talking about, as restrictions lift, organizations being in a position to really kind of take a hard look at what wasn't working before.
There has been a big shift to digital during the crisis, and that will only continue. And it's something we were well aware of and that we've been dealing with for the last 20 years. It's not new, but it's proceeded at a much slower pace. So we're expecting fewer researchers to use reading rooms. There's going to be less travel, probably. So travel budgets for academics will be pared back. People won't want to travel, they won't be able to travel. We have to find other means to get collections catalogued quickly, not waiting 10 years with it sitting on the shelf, but catalogued, even if it's only to a very limited standard, so that people can have an idea of what's in there and begin using it. And archive collections that are not used, they atrophy and they disappear. Archives need to be used. One thing I would say is that we're really keen on this project, that we look at all aspects of Jewish life and people. We didn't want it to be the usual stories, as it were. And we wanted to also approach it from the angle of non-Jewish people and how they interact with the Jewish community. For example, the Church of England or Parliament and lawmakers. And we'd like to have done more of that work, and really the sky's the limit. So we're very keen on getting further funding and doing more work so that we can deepen the stories, we can make more connections, and that we can save and preserve and reuse many more of these wonderful stories and collections.
So when you're talking about more funding, do you see there being a lot of potential for crossover with this peripatetic archive, the field archivist, and the community engagement and external partnerships coming in together to form a bid for some sort of funding? And is that something that might be on the cards?
I think one of the issues with archives in the UK sectorally is that local authority archives have been under such pressure financially. And we need to find ways of supporting them and supporting staff more effectively through a variety of means. And we at AIM25 have been developing a suite of different tools and products and services that we think can help archivists, whether that's storage, cataloguing, conservation, and so on. And when AIM25 is relaunched, those will be made available to members and to the public.
In terms of the way that we approach this project, it made me think differently about catalogues and catalogue descriptions, because it made me realise how live they are, that actually they're not, in a sense, you can, and from a researcher's perspective, this is quite pertinent as well, because I think it's important to keep those archival descriptions moving by, revisiting, what the collection's about, perhaps, emphasising something slightly different in a description. So a description isn't just something that somebody writes, at a given date and then it never changes. It needs to change to reflect the fact that, different people are interpreting or using the material, if you know what I mean. So it kind of made me aware of this connection between the people using and looking at the material and the catalogue description itself. And obviously that's a really important connection. But when we were enhancing descriptions, it felt like you were bringing something to life a little bit more.
Catalogues do need to be refreshed periodically. There's no such thing as a catalogued collection. Collections always need to be recatalogued or looked at afresh over time, because certain things will be highlighted in one era, and in another era other things will be. So in the case of 17th century history or 16th century history, at one time it was the story of the kings and queens. It was the big national story. And as we began to delve into the archives and look more deeply, find different stories. So the catalogues and indexes of those papers needed to be updated and modernized and enlarged and deepened. The result has been a burgeoning in scholarship in that area. And the same thing has happened throughout the historical enterprise. So I think the work of the archivist is never done. There's never such thing as a completed catalogue in a closed box and you can wash your hands and that's done and dusted. There'll always be a need for an archivist.